She was 7 months pregnant, alone in a hospital waiting room, when her husband's mistress walked in, and what happened next shocked an entire city. A fall down the stairs, a premature baby fighting for his life, a billionaire father who swore revenge. They thought they could silence her. They erased the footage, twisted the truth, and destroyed her reputation. But they didn't count on one thing. Her father was Richard Morrison, and he was about to remind Boston why you never cross a Morrison. This is the perfect revenge, a story of betrayal, power, and a father's ruthless love. If you love stories full of shocking twists, deep emotions, and justice served cold, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Claire Morrison sat alone in the maternity waiting area of Mercy General Hospital, scrolling through her phone. At 7 months pregnant, she had learned to manage her disappointment. The text from her husband Marcus read simply, "Can't make it, emergency meeting." She deleted it without responding. This wasn't the first time he had missed an appointment. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. Claire looked up. Sabrina Hayes walked in wearing designer heels that clicked against the linoleum floor with deliberate precision. Every head in the waiting room turned. The woman was stunning in a way that required money. Lots of it. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, a tailored suit that probably cost more than Claire's monthly rent. Sabrina sat directly next to Claire, close enough to be threatening. "Hello, Claire," Sabrina whispered, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Claire's stomach tightened. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus told me about the prenup clause," Sabrina said quietly. "If you lose the baby before 8 months, you lose everything. Did you know that when you signed it?" Claire's face drained of color. She had no idea. "He said you never read anything," Sabrina continued. "Just signed whatever he put in front of you. Trusting. That's what he called you. Naive is what I'd call it." Claire stood abruptly, trying to walk away. Her hands trembled. Sabrina grabbed her arm. "I'm not the problem, Claire. Your trust is." Claire pulled away and headed toward the stairwell, desperate to reach the nurse's station downstairs where she felt safe. Sabrina followed, her heels clicking behind like a countdown. At the top of the stairs, Sabrina leaned close and whispered, "He doesn't want this baby, and neither do I." Then she pushed. Claire grabbed for the railing, but Sabrina's diamond Cartier bracelet snagged on Claire's hospital identification band. The bracelet broke, beads scattering down the stairs like raindrops. Claire fell. She tumbled down half a flight, her body twisting, her hands desperately reaching for something to grab. Blood, screaming, chaos. Hospital staff rushed to the stairwell. Someone was calling for a doctor. Another voice shouted for a gurney. Claire felt warm liquid spreading beneath her. She tried to speak, to tell them about the baby, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing she heard before everything went black was someone yelling, "We need an operating room now! Emergency C-section!" When Claire woke in the recovery room, she was alone. The sterile white ceiling blurred in and out of focus. Her body felt hollow, empty in a way that made her panic. A nurse appeared beside her bed. "Mrs. Morrison, you're awake. You're going to be okay." "My baby," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "He's in the NICU. 3 pounds, 2 ounces. He was born at 30 weeks. The doctors are doing everything they can." "What are his chances?" The nurse hesitated. "Right now, about 40%, but that number goes up every day he survives." 40% on. Claire closed her eyes. Her son had a 40% chance of living because she had trusted the wrong person. A knock at the door made her open her eyes. Marcus walked in. Sabrina was with him. "I came as soon as I heard," Marcus said, his voice full of fake concern. "You brought her?" Claire's voice was barely audible. "I was with Marcus when he got the call," Sabrina explained, her face a mask of false sympathy. "I insisted on coming. I feel terrible about what happened." Claire stared at them both. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The missed appointments, the late nights, the lipstick in his car 3 months ago that he said came from a client meeting. "Get out," Claire said. "Claire, you're emotional. The doctor said you need rest." "Get out," Claire screamed. "Both of you, get out!" Security appeared and escorted them from the room. Claire was alone again, alone with the knowledge that her husband and his mistress had planned this. That somewhere in this hospital, her 3-pound baby boy was fighting for his life while his father was fighting for money. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in 5 years. Dad. Her finger hovered over the call button. She remembered his last words to her at the wedding she insisted on having. "You're making a mistake. When you realize it, don't come crying to me." She had replied, defiant and hurt. "Then I guess I won't have a father anymore." They hadn't spoken since. Claire put the phone down. She couldn't face him. He had been right about everything, and that made calling him impossible. Instead, she sat alone in the dark and wondered how her life had become a nightmare. 3 hours after the attack, Marcus and Sabrina sat in the hospital security office. The security chief, a tired man in his 50s, leaned back in his chair. "The footage from the stairwell," Marcus said smoothly. "I need to see it. My wife fell, and I need to understand what happened." The security chief scratched his chin. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. There's a technical issue. The camera malfunctioned." "Malfunctioned?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "These things happen. Old system. You know how it is." Marcus slid an envelope across the desk. The security chief glanced down at it, then pocketed it without opening it. "I'll see what I can do," the man said. But between you and me, these old tapes corrupt all the time. Technology, can't rely on it." Marcus nodded and stood. Sabrina followed him out. In the hallway, she grabbed his arm. "That was too easy." "I've been donating to this hospital for years," Marcus said. "They know which side their bread is buttered on." "And Claire? She has no proof. It's her word against yours. A jealous wife versus a respected corporate lawyer. Who do you think they'll believe?" Sabrina smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What about the baby?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "The prenup is clear. If he doesn't make it to full term, she gets nothing. The company is $280 million in debt, Sabrina. I can't afford a divorce settlement." This was the only way out. "You didn't tell me you were going to push her." "I didn't push anyone. You did. And if anyone asks, you were trying to help her when she fell. She accused you because she's unstable and looking for someone to blame." They walked to the parking garage in silence. Back in her hospital room, Claire's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "He paid them to erase the footage. You have no proof. Walk away while you still can." Claire's hands shook. She called 911. 30 minutes later, Detective Ramos appeared in her doorway. He was in his 40s, overworked, with the skeptical expression of someone who had heard too many stories. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, pulling out a notebook. "You wanted to report an assault?" "Yes. My husband's mistress pushed me down the stairs. I'm 7 months pregnant." "Was 7 months pregnant?" "My baby was born premature because of her." Detective Ramos wrote something down. "Any witnesses?" "The security footage." "Already checked. Camera was broken." "It wasn't broken. My husband paid them to erase it." The detective sighed. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband's company has significant contracts with the city. I can't accuse him of bribing hospital security without evidence." Claire reached into her bedside table and pulled out a plastic bag. Inside was Sabrina's broken bracelet. "This is hers. It broke off when she pushed me. It has an engraving." Detective Ramos examined it. The engraving read, "S.H. Always yours, M.M." "This proves she was there," he said. "Doesn't prove she pushed you." "Then what does?" "Video. Witnesses. Something concrete." He handed the bracelet back. "I'll file the report. But honestly, this is a she said situation. Without evidence, the district attorney won't touch it." He left. Claire sat in the dark, holding the bracelet. No proof, no witnesses, no hope. She had never felt more powerless in her life. The next morning, Claire wheeled herself to the NICU against medical advice. Through the glass, she could see her son, tiny, covered in wires and tubes, machines breathing for him. A NICU nurse approached, kind and maternal. "He's a fighter. We've seen smaller babies pull through." "Can I touch him?" "Of course, come with me." The nurse led Claire to the incubator. Claire reached through the small opening and touched her son's hand. It was smaller than her thumb. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." The baby's fingers curled slightly, as if grabbing onto her promise. "What will you name him?" the nurse asked. Claire hadn't thought about it. Marcus had wanted to wait until after the birth. Now she realized he probably never cared about naming their child. "James," she said. "His name is James." That afternoon, Claire met with Jennifer Walsh, a public defender who took her case pro bono. Jennifer was in her 50s, overworked but dedicated. "I've reviewed your prenup," Jennifer said, spreading papers across her desk. "Claire, it's bad." "How bad?" "If your baby doesn't survive to full term, legally defined as 37 weeks, you forfeit all claims to marital assets." James was born at 30 weeks. "I know, and there's more. The prenup includes a mandatory arbitration clause. You can't sue in civil court. Everything goes through a private arbitrator chosen by Morrison Development's legal team." Claire felt sick. "That's legal? You signed it." "Marcus said it was standard." Jennifer shook her head. "Standard? This is a trap disguised as a contract. The arbitration clause, the custody provisions, the asset forfeiture if the baby doesn't survive to term. Claire, he planned this from the beginning. I thought he loved me. Maybe he did once, but love and greed make terrible bedfellows." Jennifer slid another document across the desk. "There's something else. Marcus filed for emergency custody this morning." "Custody? James is in the NICU. He's claiming you're mentally unstable. He submitted your 911 call as evidence, says you're making delusional accusations about Sabrina to deflect from your own negligence." Negligence? "He's claiming you fell because you were on your phone, not paying attention. He has an affidavit from Sabrina saying she tried to help you, but you accused her of pushing you." Claire couldn't breathe. "And they believe her?" "She's a corporate lawyer with no criminal record. You're, forgive me, a nurse who married rich and signed a terrible prenup. The optics aren't great." That evening, when Claire returned to the hospital for her supervised visit with James, a hospital administrator stopped her. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry, there's a court order. You're only allowed supervised visitation." "Supervised? He's my son." A CPS worker appeared with a clipboard. "I'll be supervising today's visit. You have 30 minutes. Claire sat by James's incubator, humiliated, while a stranger watched her every move. Her life had become a prison, and she had no idea how to escape. Claire moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment. Marcus kept the penthouse, the cars, everything. She took her clothes and a few personal items. The first night alone, her phone buzzed with a Google alert for her name. The headline made her stomach drop. "Billionaire's wife accuses husband's colleague of hospital attack. Friends say she's unstable." She clicked the article. Photos of her and Marcus at charity events filled the screen. A quote from a source close to the family read, "Claire has always been jealous and controlling. When she found out Marcus was working with Sabrina, she spiraled. We're worried about her mental state." The comments section was brutal. "Gold digger can't handle losing the prenup, LOL. She probably fell on purpose for attention. Why is she harassing this poor woman?" Claire threw her phone across the room. The next day, when she arrived at the hospital for her supervised visit, a small group of reporters waited outside. "Claire, is it true you're suing Sabrina Hayes? Did you really attack her first? Why won't you let your husband see his son?" Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in her face. Claire tried to push through, nearly fell. "Are you okay? You seem unsteady." The footage made the evening news. The anchor's voice was clinical. "Claire Morrison, seen here struggling to walk, has been denied unsupervised access to her premature infant. Sources say the hospital is concerned about her ability to care for the child." Claire watched from her apartment, numb. This was what powerlessness felt like, being destroyed publicly while your husband and his mistress walked free. At 3 in the morning, Claire couldn't sleep. She got dressed and drove to the hospital. The NICU was quiet. The night nurse sat at the desk, her back turned. Claire slipped into the NICU and went to James's incubator. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "It's Mommy. I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I couldn't stay away. You're all I have left." The lights suddenly turned on. "Ma'am, step away from the incubator." A security guard stood in the doorway. "I'm his mother." "You're violating a court order. I'm calling the police." Claire spent the rest of the night in a holding cell at Boston Police Department. Detective Ramos appeared at dawn. "Mrs. Morrison, we meet again. I just wanted to see my son. I get it, but you violated a restraining order. That's a crime. A restraining order against my own baby? Against entering the NICU outside of approved hours. Your husband requested it. Judge signed off." He slid a piece of paper through the bars. "Your arraignment is at 9. You'll be released on your own recognizance. But Claire, stop making this worse for yourself." When she walked out of the police station that morning, she walked into a wall of cameras. Her mugshot had already leaked. The headline, "Unstable Mother Arrested Trying to Kidnap Own Baby." Social media exploded. The hashtag Gold Digger Claire trended. Former nursing colleagues were interviewed. "She always talked about marrying rich," one said. Tabloids speculated. Did she fall on purpose? The truth about Claire Morrison. That afternoon, Jennifer Walsh called with more bad news. "Claire, the judge granted Marcus temporary full custody." "What?" "Your arrest last night didn't help. Combined with the psychiatric evaluation Marcus's team submitted." "What psychiatric evaluation? I never saw a psychiatrist." "His team had one evaluate you based on observed behavior and court documents." "It's legal. Unethical, but legal." "So I can't see my son?" "Not until the full custody hearing in 60 days. Claire hung up and stared at her phone. The contact labeled Dad stared back at her. She had hit rock bottom. Her pride was gone. Her options were gone. Everything was gone except one person she had sworn never to call. She took a deep breath and made the call. "I told you not to call me unless you were ready to admit I was right." Richard Morrison's voice was cold. "You were right," Claire said, crying, "and about everything. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Please, I have no one else." Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Text me the address. I'm coming." For the first time in weeks, Claire felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Richard Morrison stood in the doorway of his daughter's tiny apartment. At 68, he still commanded every room he entered. Silver hair, tailored suit, eyes that had built a billion-dollar empire. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks, Dad," Claire replied weakly. He walked in and surveyed the modest space. "This is where you've been living?" "Marcus kept the penthouse." "Of course he did." Richard's jaw tightened. "Show me everything. Documents, police reports, news articles, everything." An hour later, Richard sat at Claire's small kitchen table, reading through files. His expression grew darker with each page. "You signed this prenup without a lawyer?" Marcus said it was standard. "Standard?" Richard looked up sharply. "This is a trap disguised as a contract. The arbitration clause, the custody provisions, the asset forfeiture if the baby doesn't survive to term. Claire, he planned this from the beginning. I thought he loved me. He loved my name. The Morrison name still means something in Boston. He wanted proximity to my reputation. He used you." Claire sat down across from him. "I should have listened to you." "Yes, you should have." Richard paused. "But I should have fought harder to stop you. Instead, I walked away. I was prideful and stubborn." He reached across the table and took her hand. "So was my daughter." Tears streamed down Claire's face. "I'm here now," Richard said, "and I promise you they will pay for what they did." "Dad, the police won't help. The courts won't help. I have no proof." Richard's eyes hardened. "Then we'll make our own justice." The next morning, Richard called an emergency meeting at Morrison Capital headquarters. His corner office overlooked Boston Harbor, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city he had conquered decades ago. 3 people sat across from him. Kate Brennan, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, Daniel Foster, a forensic accountant, and Lisa Torres, a crisis management and media consultant. "I want to know everything about Marcus Morrison and Sabrina Hayes," Richard said. "Financials, communications, whereabouts. Everything." Kate leaned forward. "What's the budget?" "Unlimited. I want results in 72 hours." The investigation began immediately. Kate Brennan reviewed the hospital's security system and found that the malfunctioning camera had been manually disabled at 2:45 in the afternoon, exactly 2 minutes before the attack. She tracked down the security chief who had taken Marcus's bribe. Wearing a wire, she got him to confess on tape. Yeah, Morrison paid me 50 grand to wipe the footage, the man admitted, unaware he was being recorded. What was I supposed to do, say no? 50 grand is more than I make in a year. Daniel Foster traced Marcus's company finances and discovered Morrison Development was $280 million in debt. He found that Sabrina Hayes had been on the payroll as a special legal consultant for $40,000 per month for 18 months, with no actual legal work documented. Wire transfers from Marcus's personal account to Sabrina showed an additional $15,000 monthly in consulting fees. Lisa Torres subpoenaed phone records through private channels and discovered 847 text messages between Marcus and Sabrina over the past year. The key messages told the whole story. 3 months ago, Marcus had texted, "The prenup is ironclad. If the baby doesn't make it to term, she gets nothing." 2 months ago, Sabrina replied, "What if something happened to speed things along?" Marcus, "What are you suggesting?" Sabrina, "I'm just saying stress can cause premature labor. Nature is unpredictable." 1 week before the attack, Marcus had sent, "She has an appointment Thursday at Mercy General, 2:45. The day before the attack, Sabrina replied, "I'll handle it." Most importantly, Kate obtained the real security footage from the hospital's backup server, the one Marcus didn't know about. The video showed everything. Sabrina deliberately pushing Claire. No ambiguity, no accident, premeditated assault. That night, Richard's team gathered in the conference room at Morrison Capital. Evidence covered the table like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. "We have everything," Kate said. "Video, texts, financial records, witness testimony." "Take it to the district attorney," Richard ordered. Daniel shook his head. "Richard, there's a problem. I found something else. Marcus has been funneling campaign donations to the current DA, $250,000 over the past 3 years. So the DA is compromised." Lisa nodded. "Not just the DA. I've been tracking media coverage. 3 major outlets have killed stories about this case. Marcus's PR firm has connections to their editorial boards." Richard leaned back in his chair. "They've bought the system." "So what do we do?" Kate asked. Richard smiled, but there was no kindness in it. "We go over their heads, directly to the people." Despite knowing the DA was compromised, Richard's team presented the evidence anyway. They needed it on record. The DA, a politician in his 50s, reviewed the files while sweating visibly. "This is compelling," he admitted. "I'll open an investigation." "Investigation?" Kate's voice was sharp. "We just gave you a completed case. I still need to follow procedure, build our own case. Could take months." Richard stood. "Months? My grandson is fighting for his life while his mother is being destroyed in the media. And you want months?" "I understand, Mr. Morrison, but I can't rush this. Marcus Morrison has rights too." "You mean the Morrison whose company donated to your last 3 campaigns?" The DA went pale. "That's irrelevant." "No," Richard said coldly. "It's evidence, and I'll make sure everyone knows about it." As Richard and his team exited the DA's office, Kate's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went white. "Richard, we have a problem." The news alerts came rapid fire. "Marcus Morrison files defamation lawsuit against Richard Morrison. Claims vengeful ex-father-in-law fabricating evidence. Judge grants emergency restraining order. Richard Morrison barred from contacting grandson or daughter. Morrison Development announces $500 million government contract, largest in company history." Richard understood immediately. They're entrenching, making themselves untouchable. That night, Richard sat alone in his office. His phone rang. "Claire, Dad, they're saying you can't see me anymore. The restraining order." "I know. And Marcus is on the news saying you're making everything up. People are believing him." Her voice broke. The doctors say he's not responding to treatment. They're talking about end-of-life decisions, and I can't even be there because of the custody order." She sobbed. "We lost, Dad. They won." Richard closed his eyes, then opened them with renewed determination. "No, sweetheart, they haven't won. They've just made a very big mistake." "What do you mean?" "They thought I would play by the rules, use lawyers and courts and politics. But I built my empire when Boston was broken and corrupt. I know how to fight dirty, and I'm about to remind this city why people used to fear the Morrison name. Richard gathered his team in the war room the next morning. The restraining order meant he couldn't contact Claire directly, but nothing stopped him from fighting for her. "We're not using the courts anymore," he announced. "We're not going through the DA. We're going to destroy them in the court of public opinion." "How?" Lisa asked. "I'm buying a primetime television special. 2 hours. National broadcast." Kate's eyes widened. "Richard, that's going to cost $15 million. I already made the call. It airs in 72 hours. Daniel leaned forward. "What are we going to show?" "Everything. The security footage, the text messaging, the financial records, Marcus's campaign donations, the bribed security guard's confession. All of it. Marcus will sue for defamation," Lisa warned. "Truth is an absolute defense. Let him sue. We have the evidence." Kate frowned. "What about the restraining order? You're not supposed to have contact with Claire." Richard's smile was grim. "I'm not going to contact her. She's going to watch from her apartment, along with 50 million other Americans." While the television special was being prepared, Richard launched a simultaneous attack on Marcus's finances. He sat across from the Bank of Boston's president, a man in his 60s who had known Richard for 30 years. "Morrison Development has 3 major loans with this bank," Richard said. "Total, $120 million. I'm calling them." "Richard, you don't have the authority. I own 40% of this bank's commercial debt through my investment fund. If those loans aren't called by end of business today, I'll pull all of it. Every penny." The bank president's face went pale. "You'd crash your own investments?" "I've made and lost more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. I can afford it. Can you?" By the end of the day, the bank called Morrison Development's loans. Marcus couldn't pay. His company entered emergency bankruptcy. The stock price crashed 87% in a single day. Investors panicked. Marcus's penthouse went into foreclosure. His cars were repossessed. The headlines Richard wanted started appearing. Morrison Development Files, Chapter 11, CEO's personal assets seized. Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the television special aired. The title card read, "The Morrison Scandal, a Special Investigation." The narrator's voice was grave. "Tonight we expose a conspiracy of greed, corruption, and attempted murder that reaches the highest levels of Boston's elite." The special opened with an interview of Claire, pre-recorded in a simple chair with no makeup. She looked authentic, vulnerable, strong. "They made me look like a criminal for trying to see my dying son," she said, showing her mugshot. Then she held up a photo of James in the NICU. "This is James. He weighs 3 pounds. He's fighting for his life while his father fights for money." The security footage came next. Crystal clear video of Sabrina pushing Claire down the stairs. The producers played it 3 times from different angles, including slow motion replay. The narrator's voice cut through. "This is not an accident. This is assault." The text messages appeared on screen, read by actors to protect the evidence chain. "What if something happened to speed things along?" "I'll handle it." Viewers across America gasped in their living rooms. Daniel Foster, the forensic accountant, appeared on camera to explain the prenup clause, the $280 million debt, the payments to Sabrina. This was premeditated fraud designed to make Claire Morrison forfeit her rights when her baby died, he said directly to the camera. The bribed security guard's confession played in full. "Marcus Morrison paid me $50,000 to erase the footage. I did it. I'm sorry." The special showed campaign finance records, $250,000 from Morrison Development to the DA, the same DA who had refused to prosecute the case. Then Richard appeared, speaking directly to the camera. "I am a billionaire," he said. "I built my fortune through hard work and ruthless business practices. But I never hurt an innocent person. My son-in-law and his accomplice tried to kill my daughter and grandson for money. I will not rest until they face justice. And if the system won't deliver it, I will." The final image showed Claire holding an ultrasound photo. Her voiceover filled American living rooms. "I saved Richard Morrison's life 6 years ago when I was his ICU nurse. Now he's saving mine." That's what family does. The end card provided a tip line number. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the hashtag Morrison scandal was trending #1 worldwide. Justice for Claire followed close behind. The special drew 50 million viewers, the highest-rated non-sports program of the year. By morning, every major news outlet covered the story. CNN, billionaire father exposes alleged conspiracy to harm daughter. Fox News, Boston DA under fire for campaign finance scandal. MSNBC, security footage shows pregnant woman deliberately pushed. Politicians responded swiftly. The Massachusetts Attorney General announced a state investigation. The FBI opened a federal corruption probe into the bribery of public officials. The DA was forced to recuse himself. Marcus's lawyer issued a statement. This is a character assassination funded by a vindictive billionaire. Sabrina tried to flee to Canada. The FBI stopped her at the border. Public outrage was instant, fierce, and unforgiving. The system had failed Claire Morrison, but the people wouldn't. 2 weeks after the television special, the trial began at Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were everywhere. This was the trial of the year. Sabrina Hayes sat at the defense table looking gaunt and frightened. Her expensive lawyer sat beside her, shuffling papers nervously. Marcus Morrison sat separately. He had turned state's evidence against Sabrina to avoid harsher charges, a move that surprised no one. Weak men always tried to save themselves. The new prosecutor, uncorrupted and hungry for justice, called Claire Morrison to the stand. Claire walked to the witness box with her head high. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. She looked like what she was, a mother fighting for her child. Mrs. Morrison, please tell the jury what happened on the afternoon of October 15th. Claire's voice was steady. Sabrina Hayes pushed me down a flight of stairs while I was 7 months pregnant. My son was born premature as a result. He spent 89 days in the NICU fighting for his life. Sabrina's defense attorney stood. Isn't it true that you and your husband were having marital problems? That you were unstable? I wasn't unstable, Claire said calmly. I was being gaslit. There's a difference. The lawyer showed the jury the prenup. This prenup shows that you stood to lose everything if your baby didn't survive. Isn't it possible you fabricated this story to what? Claire interrupted. Hurt myself, nearly kill my baby? For what reason? For money, for sympathy, I'm a nurse. I was making $60,000 a year when I met Marcus. I didn't need his money. I needed honesty. And when I didn't get it, I called the one person who always told me the truth. She looked at Richard sitting in the gallery. My father. He's the one who taught me that power isn't about money. It's about using whatever you have to protect the people you love. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution presented the security footage. The jury watched in horror as Sabrina deliberately pushed a pregnant woman down the stairs. They presented the text messages. 847 messages planning the attack, planning the cover-up, planning to steal Claire's life. They presented the financial records showing $280 million in debt, showing the payments to Sabrina, showing the bribed security guard. The defense had nothing. They tried to paint Sabrina as a victim of circumstance, a woman in love who made a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder with the baby as the victim. At sentencing, the judge looked at Sabrina with undisguised contempt. Miss Hayes, you deliberately attacked a pregnant woman for financial gain. You endangered an innocent child's life. The court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. Sabrina's face crumpled. Her expensive lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing he could do. The judge turned to Marcus. Mr. Morrison, you conspired to harm your own child for financial gain. You orchestrated a campaign to destroy your wife's reputation. You corrupted public officials. The court accepts your plea deal. 6 years in federal prison, $5 million in restitution to Claire Morrison, and permanent loss of parental rights. The judge leaned forward. I hope you spend every day of your sentence reflecting on what you've become. Marcus stared at the floor, broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Claire and Richard. Claire, How do you feel about the verdict? Claire spoke clearly. I feel grateful that justice was served. I feel grateful for my father, who never gave up on me. And I feel grateful that my son will grow up in a world that values truth over power. Richard, what's next for you? Richard put his arm around his daughter. I'm spending time with my family. That's all that matters now. As they walked to the car, Richard whispered to Claire, "It's over. They can't hurt you anymore." Claire nodded, but she was already thinking about the future, about the women who didn't have a billionaire father to save them, about the system that had failed her until public outrage forced it to act. She had an idea, a foundation, a way to help others, but first she needed to see her son. 1 year after the trial, Claire Morrison sat on the floor of her new home, a modest but comfortable house in a quiet Boston neighborhood filled with sunlight. James, now 14 months old, played with colorful wooden blocks beside her. He was healthy, laughing, reaching for her with chubby hands, a miracle in every sense of the word. Richard sat in a comfortable armchair nearby, watching them with a smile that had taken months to return to his face. The lines around his eyes had softened. He looked younger somehow, despite being 69 years old. "Papa!" James reached for Richard with both arms. Richard set down his newspaper and picked up his grandson, lifting him high. James squealed with delight. "Hey, buddy, you're getting so big. Soon you'll be taller than Grandpa." The doorbell rang. Claire opened it to find the same NICU nurse who had cared for James during those terrifying early days. Maria Rodriguez visited monthly now, checking on James's progress as part of a long-term study on premature infants. But she had become more than a medical professional. She was family. Maria entered the living room, shaking her head in wonder as she watched James toddle across the floor with impressive confidence. "I still can't believe this is the same baby," she said, pulling out her tablet to record observations. 3 pounds to 30 pounds in 14 months. His motor skills are advanced for his age. No developmental delays. It's remarkable. "It's not a miracle," Claire said, smiling, as James crashed into her legs and hugged them. "It's stubbornness. He's a Morrison through and through." Richard laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. "Stubborn is right. Last week he refused to go to bed until I read him the same story 5 times. 5 times. "Which story?" Maria asked, charting James's measurements. "The one about the little engine that could," Richard said. "Appropriate, I suppose. He certainly could." Claire watched her father with James, seeing a side of Richard Morrison few people knew existed. The ruthless businessman who had destroyed Marcus's empire with calculated precision now spent his afternoons reading children's books and building block towers. The transformation was complete. Later that week, Claire met with Richard at Morrison Capital for what had become their weekly planning meeting. His corner office still overlooked Boston Harbor, but these days the sleek conference table was covered with blueprints for safe houses, legal documents for the foundation, and grant applications instead of real estate deals. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Claire said, sliding a folder across the table. The title read, "Safe Haven Foundation, Protecting Mothers and Children from Domestic Violence." Richard opened it and began reading. The proposal was comprehensive. Legal aid services, emergency shelters, counseling programs, training for healthcare workers, police officers, and judges, a 24-hour hotline. Everything Claire had wished existed when she needed help. "I'm starting a nonprofit," Claire explained. "I want to help women who don't have a billionaire father to save them. Women who are trapped in abusive relationships with no resources, no support, nowhere to turn." Or Richard studied the budget projections, the organizational structure, the mission statement. His business mind evaluated every detail. "This is ambitious," he said. "You're talking about multiple safe houses, full-time staff, a legal team. The overhead alone, I know it's expensive. That's why I'm asking for your advice, not your money. I want to do this right. I want to build something sustainable that will last long after we're gone." Richard looked up at his daughter. She sat across from him with confidence he hadn't seen before the attack. Confidence earned through suffering and survival. "How much do you need?" he asked. "Dad, I wasn't asking for money. I was asking for your expertise in—" "How much?" he repeated firmly. Claire sighed. $10 million to start would cover the first 2 years of operations, including 3 safe houses, a legal team, and counseling services. After that, we'd need to rely on grants and donations. Richard pulled out his checkbook, the same checkbook that had once financed real estate empires and corporate takeovers. He wrote carefully, tore out the check, and slid it across the table. Claire looked down. $25 million. That's seed funding, Richard said. I'll match every dollar you raise going forward, up to 100 million total. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Dad, that's too much. It's not nearly enough. Do you know what I spent on the television special? 15 million. Do you know how much I've spent over my lifetime on buildings that will eventually crumble? Billions. What you're building, this will save lives. This will last. This matters. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered through ruthless ambition. I spent 40 years building an empire, Richard said quietly. I made enemies. I destroyed competitors. I prioritized profit over people, and I was miserable. He turned to face her. Then you called me. You needed help. And for the first time in decades, I felt like what I did actually mattered. You saved me, Claire said. No, you saved it by yourself by having the courage to ask for help. I just provided resources. What you're doing now, building this foundation, helping other women, that's real power. That's real legacy. Claire stood and hugged her father. Thank you for everything, for coming when I called, for fighting when I couldn't, for teaching me what strength really means. Thank you, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, for calling me when you needed help, for letting me fix my mistake, for reminding me that family isn't about control or conditions. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard. 6 months later, the Safe Haven Foundation officially opened its doors. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place at the first safe house, a beautifully renovated Victorian home in Dorchester that could house 8 women and their children. The event was covered by local news stations. Boston's mayor attended, along with state representatives, domestic violence advocates, and dozens of survivors who had heard about Claire's story and wanted to support the cause. Claire stood at the podium, Richard beside her holding James, who was dressed in a tiny suit that made him look impossibly adorable. This foundation exists because I was lucky, Claire began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. I had resources most women don't have. I had a father who fought for me. I had access to the best investigators, lawyers, and media consultants money could buy. But no woman should need a billionaire to get justice. No woman should have to fight alone. She looked at the gathered crowd, seeing faces of women who understood exactly what she meant. The Safe Haven Foundation exists to level the playing field, to provide every woman, regardless of her bank account, with the tools she needs to escape abuse. Legal representation, safe housing, counseling, job training, childcare, whatever it takes to rebuild a life. Claire gestured to the beautiful house behind her. This is just the beginning. We plan to open 3 more safe houses in the next year, establish a 24-hour hotline, and train every emergency room nurse in Massachusetts to recognize signs of domestic violence. The crowd applauded. But more than programs and services, Claire continued, we're building a community, a family for people who feel alone, because that's what saved me. Not money, not lawyers, not even the evidence that put my attackers in prison. What saved me was knowing I wasn't alone, that someone believed me, that someone would fight for me. She looked at Richard, who was blinking back tears while James pulled at his tie. My father taught me that power without purpose is meaningless. That true strength isn't about control, it's about protection. That family shows up even when you're not wanted, even when you've said things you regret, even when pride tells you to walk away. Claire's voice grew stronger. So to every woman watching this who feels trapped, who feels powerless, who thinks no one will believe her, we believe you, we see you, and we will fight for you. You don't have to do this alone. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Women in the crowd were crying, hugging each other, sharing stories. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Claire hesitantly. She was maybe 30, with a black eye poorly concealed by makeup and a little girl clinging to her leg. Mrs. Morrison, I saw you on the news last year, during the trial. I've been planning to leave for months, but I had nowhere to go. Can you help me? Claire knelt down to the little girl's level. What's your name, sweetie? Emma, the girl whispered. Claire looked up at the mother. Emma's mom. We have a room ready for you right now. We have a lawyer who can file a restraining order tomorrow morning. We have a counselor on staff. And we have other women here who they'd understand exactly what you're going through. The woman started crying. I don't have any money. He controls all our accounts. You don't need money, Claire said firmly. You just need courage. And you've already shown incredible courage by coming here today. She stood and put her arm around the woman's shoulders. Kate, our security director, she's the woman over there in the Navy suit. She'll help you get your essential belongings safely. If he's at work right now, we can have a team at your house within the hour. What if he finds out? What if he comes here? We have 24-hour security. He won't get near you or Emma. You're safe now. The woman sobbed with relief, holding her daughter close. Thank you. Thank you so much. As Kate led them inside to begin the intake process, Richard approached Claire. First client? He asked. First of many, I hope. You're changing lives already. Claire watched through the window as Emma and her mother were welcomed by staff members, offered tea and cookies, shown to their room. We're changing lives, she corrected. None of this would exist without you. I just wrote a check. You're doing the real work. Claire shook her head. You did more than write a check, Dad. You showed me that power isn't about money or control. It's about using whatever you have to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's the legacy you're leaving. Not buildings or businesses or bank accounts. Lives saved, families protected, justice served. Richard's eyes were wet. When did you get so wise? I learned it from the best. By the end of the first year, the Safe Haven Foundation had helped over 1,000 women and children escape abusive situations. The statistics were staggering. 3 more safe houses opened. The hotline received over 5,000 calls. 30 women found employment through the job training program. 50 children received counseling services. But the numbers didn't capture the real impact. They didn't capture the moment when a woman slept through the night for the first time in years without fear. They didn't capture the little boy who stopped flinching when someone raised their voice. They didn't capture the mother who graduated from nursing school and could support her children without depending on an abuser. Claire kept a photo album of success stories in her office. Women who had rebuilt their lives. Children who were thriving. Families that were healing. One photo showed Emma and her mother at their new apartment, holding keys and smiling. The black eye had faded. The fear in their eyes had been replaced by hope. That photo reminded Claire why she did this work, why she spent 12-hour days managing staff, reviewing cases, fundraising, training volunteers. Because every woman who walked through those doors was herself 5 years ago, broken but not destroyed, scared but not defeated, ready to fight if someone would just fight with her. The Safe Haven Foundation became that someone. And Claire Morrison, former victim, former nurse, former powerless wife, became the woman she'd needed when she was falling down those hospital stairs. She became a warrior for women who couldn't fight alone. She became hope for people who had none. She became proof that the worst thing that ever happens to you doesn't have to define you. It can transform you instead. 4 years after the trial that changed everything, Claire Morrison stood in her backyard on a perfect October afternoon. 20 children ran around playing tag, their laughter filling the air like music. Parents chatted near the picnic tables, drinking lemonade and watching their kids with a relaxed contentment that came from community and safety. James's 5th birthday party was in full swing. Richard presided over the grill with surprising competence, flipping hot dogs and hamburgers while wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Grandpa," that James had picked out specifically for this occasion. At 69, Richard Morrison looked more at peace than Claire had ever seen him. The sharp edges that had defined him for decades had softened into something gentler, but no less powerful. "Never thought I'd see the day," Kate Brennan said, walking up to Claire with a plate of potato salad. Kate was 50 now, still running the foundation's security operations with the same fierce dedication she'd brought to the FBI. Richard Morrison, billionaire real estate mogul, flipping hot dogs at a kid's party while wearing a novelty apron. Claire laughed, watching her father expertly manage 6 children's orders simultaneously. "He's changed. We both have. You both have." Kate agreed, taking a bite of salad. The woman you were 5 years ago wouldn't recognize you. Kate was right. The Claire who had signed that prenup without reading it, who had trusted blindly, who had let Marcus control her life, that woman felt like a stranger now. The Claire standing here today was stronger, more careful, strategic, but not cynical. That distinction mattered. She hadn't let the betrayal make her hard. She'd let it make her wise. "How's the foundation?" Kate asked, watching as her own daughter played with James. Kate's family had become part of Claire's extended family, the kind built through shared purpose rather than blood. "We're opening our fifth safe house next month in Worcester," Claire said. "And we just got approval for a statewide program training emergency room nurses to identify signs of domestic violence. Doctors and nurses will learn the questions to ask, the warning signs to look for, the resources to offer." "That's huge. How did you get that approved?" "Persistence. And the fact that our success rate speaks for itself. 85% of women who stay in our program for 6 months or longer successfully leave their abusers permanently. That's the highest rate in the state." Kate raised her lemonade glass in a toast. "To persistence. And to you, Claire. You're a hero." "I'm a survivor who got lucky enough to have help when I needed it," Claire corrected. "The real heroes are the women who escape with nothing and rebuild their lives anyway. Women like Emma, remember her? From the opening day? The woman with the little girl? Emma, the daughter, I mean?" "Yes, Emma's mom just graduated from nursing school, got a job at Mass General. They have their own apartment now, completely independent." Kate smiled. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Not just escape, but rebuilding." "Exactly. Anyone can run away. What we provide is the support to build something better." As the party continued, Claire noticed James sitting apart from the other children for a moment, watching a father and son throw a football. Her heart clenched. She walked over and sat beside him on the grass. "You okay, birthday boy?" James looked at her with those serious eyes he'd inherited from Richard. "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?" Claire had been preparing for this question for years, rehearsing different answers in her mind. But now that the moment had arrived, she found herself speaking from the heart rather than from preparation. "You have something even better," she said, pulling him into her lap. "You have a grandpa who loves you more than anything in the world. A grandpa who reads you stories every night, who teaches you to build things, who makes you pancakes shaped like dinosaurs." "But Tyler has a daddy and a grandpa." "I know, sweetie, and that's wonderful for Tyler. But families come in all different shapes. Some kids have a mommy and a daddy. Some have two mommies or two daddies. Some live with their grandparents. Some have just a mom or just a dad. What matters isn't what your family looks like. What matters is that the people in your family love you and take care of you and show up for you." James thought about this seriously. "Like when Grandpa helped you when you were sad?" Claire's breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "Grandpa told me. He said you were very brave and called him when you needed help. And he came right away because that's what families do." Tears stung Claire's eyes. She kissed the top of James's head, breathing in the little boy's smell of grass and sunshine and birthday cake. "That's exactly right. That's what families do. They show up, they fight for each other, they love each other no matter what. I love you, Mommy, and I love Grandpa. We love you too, baby. So much it's hard to put into words." James wiggled out of her lap, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Can I have more cake now?" Claire laughed. "One more piece. Then we're cutting you off, sugar monster." He ran back to join his friends, the moment of melancholy forgotten in the way only 5-year-olds can manage. Richard appeared beside her, 2 plates of cake in hand. He offered one to Claire and sat down in the grass beside her, something his 70-year-old knees protested but his heart demanded. "You told him," Claire said. "Age-appropriate version," Richard replied. "He asked why you and I are so close when some of his friends barely see their grandparents. I told him we had a disagreement once, a big one, but we fixed it because that's what families do. They fix things instead of walking away. Thank you for being honest with him and for being here for all of this." She gestured at the party, but they both knew she meant more than just the birthday celebration. Where else would I be? Richard asked, taking a bite of cake. Running your empire, making your billions, conquering new markets. Richard shook his head slowly. I have enough billions, more than enough. What I didn't have enough of was time with the people who actually matter. I spent 40 years chasing money and power, and you know what? It didn't make me happy. Watching my grandson blow out birthday candles, was surrounded by friends, knowing my daughter is changing lives every day, this makes me happy. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the party. Children played, parents laughed. The October sun cast golden light over everything, making the ordinary moment feel somehow sacred. I got a call from the governor's office last week, Richard said eventually. They want to name the new domestic violence legislation after you, the Claire Morrison Protection Act. Claire's response was immediate. Absolutely not. I told them you'd say that, Richard chuckled. I don't want my name on it. This isn't about me. It's about helping people, not creating monuments to what happened. But Claire, you turned your pain into purpose. That deserves recognition. She shook her head firmly. Call it the Safe Haven Act. That's what matters. Giving people a safe haven when they need it most, not glorifying my trauma or making me some kind of symbol. The women we help don't need a martyr. They need resources. Richard smiled with pride. Stubborn, just like your mother. I thought I was stubborn like you. That too. She was stubborn about helping people. I was stubborn about making money. You got the best of both of us. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. I miss her. I wish she could have met James. She would have adored him, and she would have been so proud of you. Richard's voice grew thick. I'm proud of you, Claire, in case I don't say it enough. You say it all the time, Dad. Good, because it's true. 6 months later, Claire stood in the State House for the signing ceremony of the Safe Haven Act. The ornate room was packed with legislators, advocates, survivors, and press. James sat in the front row between Richard and Kate, wearing his best clothes and trying very hard to sit still. The governor, a progressive woman in her 50s, who had made domestic violence prevention a cornerstone of her administration, smiled at the gathered crowd. This law will fundamentally change how Massachusetts handles domestic violence, she announced. It requires hospitals to have security protocols for pregnant women. It mandates domestic violence screening at all prenatal appointments. It provides state funding for safe houses across the Commonwealth. It trains law enforcement in trauma-informed response. And it establishes a statewide hotline that will operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The governor gestured to Claire. This law exists because one woman had the courage to speak up and the strength to fight back. Claire Morrison, would you like to say a few words? Claire approached the microphone, her hands only slightly trembling. Public speaking still made her nervous, but she'd learned to push through the discomfort. Thank you, Governor. But this law doesn't exist because of me. It exists because of every woman who came before me, every survivor who shared her story even when no one believed her, every advocate who refused to give up even when the system failed, every person who believes that safety is a right, not a privilege. She looked directly at the cameras, knowing her words would reach beyond this room. To every woman watching who feels trapped, who feels alone, who thinks no one will help you, we see you, we believe you, and we will never stop fighting for you. This law is for you. The safe houses are for you. The hotline is for you. You don't have to suffer in silence anymore. The room erupted in applause. Several women in the audience were openly crying. Claire saw herself in their faces, saw the fear and hope mixed together, saw the desperate need to believe that things could get better. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached her, survivors wanting to share their stories, advocates wanting to partner with the foundation, donors wanting to contribute. It took 2 hours to work through the crowd. Finally, exhausted but satisfied, Claire found her father and son waiting by the car. That was amazing, Mommy, James said. You were on TV. Yes, I was, buddy. Ready to go home? Can we get ice cream? Claire looked at Richard, who shrugged. Birthday boy gets ice cream whenever he wants for the whole year. Those are the rules. Those are not the rules, Claire laughed. But yes, we can get ice cream. That night, after James was asleep and Richard had gone home, Claire found an envelope in her mail. The return address made her stomach drop. MCI Framingham Women's Correctional Facility. Sabrina Hayes. Claire almost threw it away unopened. She didn't owe Sabrina anything. Didn't need to hear excuses or justifications or manipulations. But curiosity won. She opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of lined paper. Mrs. Morrison, it read in careful handwriting, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I think about what I did every single day. I think about James, about how he could have died because of my greed and jealousy. I think about you, about the pain I caused, the life I tried to destroy. I'm in a program here, learning about accountability and change. I'm working with a therapist who specializes in violence prevention. I'm not the woman I was 5 years ago. I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for me or to ask for anything. I'm saying it because you deserve to hear it, even if you never respond. I'm truly deeply sorry for what I did to you and your son. I understand if you hate me. I hate myself most days, but I wanted you to know that what you're doing with the foundation matters. I've been reading about it in here. Other women talk about it. You're saving lives. You took the worst thing I ever did and turned it into something beautiful. That's remarkable. Again, I'm so very sorry. Sabrina Hayes. Claire read it 3 times, her emotions complicated and messy. She didn't forgive Sabrina. Forgiveness wasn't something she owed anyone, and some things existed beyond the possibility of forgiveness. The woman had tried to kill her and her unborn child, had nearly succeeded, had shown no remorse during the trial, only when facing the consequences. But she could acknowledge that people change. She could accept that Sabrina was working on herself, even if they would never have a relationship, even if Claire never wanted to see her again. That was enough. Claire folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. Not in the trash, but not prominently displayed either. A piece of history, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. Then she went to James' room and watched him sleep, this miracle child who shouldn't exist according to the statistics, who had fought his way into life with the same stubborn determination that defined his family. You're safe, she whispered, and loved, and you'll grow up knowing that asking for help is strength, not weakness. That family shows up when it matters. That justice is worth fighting for. James stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Claire kissed his forehead and went to her own room, ready to sleep without nightmares for the first time in years. She had built something beautiful from something terrible. She had turned victim into survivor, into warrior. She had created a legacy that would outlive the pain that created it. And that, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, was the perfect revenge. On James's 5th birthday, Claire threw a party at Boston Common. 20 children ran around playing tag while parents chatted nearby. Richard presided over the grill, cooking hot dogs with surprising competence. Never thought I'd see the day, Kate Brennan said, walking up to Claire. Richard Morrison, billionaire real estate mogul, flipping hot dogs at a kid's party. Claire laughed. He's changed. You both have. Kate was right. The woman Claire had been 5 years ago, signing a prenup without reading it, trusting blindly, would hardly recognize the woman she'd become. Strong, careful, strategic, but not cynical. That was important. She hadn't let the betrayal make her hard. How's the foundation? Kate asked. We're opening our 5th safe house next month, and we just got approval for a program training ER nurses to identify domestic violence. That's huge. It's necessary. You know how many women are attacked while pregnant? The numbers are horrifying. If I can prevent even one person from going through what I did. She trailed off. Kate understood. You're a hero, Claire. I'm a survivor who got lucky. The real heroes are the women who escape with nothing and rebuild their lives anyway. That evening, after the party ended and the guest left, Claire tucked James into bed. He was exhausted from all the excitement, barely able to keep his eyes open. Mommy? Yes, baby? Why don't I have a daddy like the other kids? Claire had been preparing for this question for years. She sat on the edge of his bed. You have something even better. You have a grandpa who loves you more than anything in the world. And you have a mommy who would do anything to protect you. That's what family really is. People who show up for you. People who fight for you. People who love you no matter what. Like when Grandpa helped you when you were a child? Claire's eyes widened. How did you know about that? Grandpa told me. He said you were very brave and he was very proud. She kissed his forehead. Sleep tight, my brave boy. Downstairs, Richard was cleaning up the kitchen. You told him? Claire asked. Age-appropriate version. He asked why you and I are so close when some of his friends don't see their grandparents much. I told him we had a fight once, but we fixed it because that's what families do. Claire hugged him. Thank you for being here. For all of this. Where else would I be? Running your empire? Making your billions. Richard shook his head. I have enough billions. What I didn't have enough of was time with the people who matter. I'm making up for that now. They sat on the couch with coffee, a comfortable silence between them. I got a call from the governor's office, Richard said eventually. They want to name the new domestic violence legislation after you, the Claire Morrison Protection Act. Absolutely not. I told them you'd say that. I don't want my name on it. This isn't about me. It is, though. You turned your pain into purpose. That deserves recognition. Claire shook her head firmly. Call it the Safe Haven Act. That's what matters. Giving people a safe haven, not glorifying what happened to me. Richard smiled. Stubborn, like your mother. I thought I was stubborn like you. That too. They laughed together, the sound of a family healed. 6 months later, the Safe Haven Act passed into law. It required hospitals to have security protocols for pregnant women, mandated domestic violence screening at prenatal appointments, and provided funding for safe houses across Massachusetts. At the signing ceremony, the governor thanked Claire for her advocacy. She stood beside him, Richard on one side, James on the other, as cameras flashed. This law will save lives, the governor said, because one woman had the courage to speak up and the strength to fight back. Claire gave a brief speech. This law exists because of every woman who came before me, every survivor who shared her story, every advocate who refused to give up, every person who believes that safety is a right, not a privilege. To them, I say, we see you, we believe you, and we will never stop fighting for you. The audience stood and applauded. That night, Claire received a letter forwarded from the foundation. It was from Sabrina Hayes, still in prison. Claire almost threw it away, but curiosity won. The letter was short. Mrs. Morrison, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I think about what I did every day. I think about James, about how he could have died because of my greed. I think about you, about the pain I caused. I'm in a program here, learning about accountability and change. I'm not the woman I was. I'll never hurt anyone again. I'm writing this not for myself, but because you deserve to hear it. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Sabrina Hayes. Claire read it twice, then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Forgiveness, she thought, was complicated. She didn't have to forgive Sabrina. The woman had tried to kill her and her child. Some things were beyond forgiveness. But she could acknowledge the apology. She could accept that people change, even if she never had to see Sabrina again. That was enough. As the years passed, the Safe Haven Foundation became one of the most respected domestic violence organizations in the country. They helped tens of thousands of women and children escape abuse. They trained healthcare workers, lawyers, police officers. They changed laws in 12 states. Richard donated a total of $150 million before he passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78. James asleep on his lap after an afternoon of reading together. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, but also nurses from Mercy General, women from the Safe Haven Foundation, families whose lives Richard had changed. Claire gave the eulogy. My father was a complicated man, she said. He built an empire with ruthless determination. He made enemies. He made mistakes. But when I needed him most, he showed up. He fought for me. He taught me that power without purpose is meaningless. That family isn't about control, it's about love. That justice is worth any cost. She looked at James, now 10 years old, sitting in the front row. He leaves behind a grandson who knows what it means to be loved unconditionally, a foundation that will help people for generations, and a daughter who finally understands what he tried to teach her all along, that the measure of a life isn't what you build, but who you protect. After the funeral, Claire found a letter Richard had left for her with his lawyer. She opened it alone in her father's study at Morrison Capital, the room where he had planned the television special that changed everything. "My dearest Claire," it read in his precise handwriting, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. I've lived long enough. What matters now is what comes next. You've built something extraordinary with the Safe Haven Foundation. Keep building. Help people. Fight for justice. And remember, you don't need my money or my name to do great things. You already proved that. You just needed to believe in yourself. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when I was too stubborn to say it. Take care of James. Tell him his grandfather loved him. And take care of yourself. You deserve happiness, Claire. You've earned it 1,000 times over. All my love. Always, Dad." Claire cried, but they were good tears, healing tears, grateful tears. Her father had given her the greatest gift, not his wealth, but his presence when it mattered most. And she would pass that gift forward to James, to the women the foundation helped, to everyone who needed to know they weren't alone. 15 years after the attack that nearly destroyed her life, Claire Morrison stood in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston. The Safe Haven Foundation's annual gala was in full swing, 500 guests raising money to help domestic violence survivors. James, now 19 and a sophomore at Boston University studying social work, gave a speech about growing up knowing his mother was a hero. "When I was little," James said into the microphone, "I didn't understand why my mom worked so much, why she was always on the phone with women who were crying, why she traveled to open new safe houses, why our house was always full of people who needed help." The ballroom was silent, listening. As I got older, she told me the truth about what happened to her, about how my grandfather saved her, about how they decided to save others. He paused. "My mom teaches me every day that strength isn't about power or money. It's about showing up for people who need you. It's about turning pain into purpose. It's about never giving up." He looked at Claire in the front row. "Mom, you're my hero, and I'm going to spend my life helping people the way you do. Thank you for showing me what really matters." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the speeches, after the dinner, after the auction raised $3 million, Claire stood on the balcony overlooking Boston. The city lights sparkled like stars. Kate Brennan joined her. Kate was 60 now, still running the foundation's security operations, still saving lives. "You did it," Kate said. "Everything Richard dreamed of and more." "We did it," Claire corrected. "You, me, Daniel, Lisa, everyone who believed this mattered." "Do you ever think about them, Marcus and Sabrina?" Claire considered the question. "Sometimes. Marcus got out of prison 3 years ago. He works at a bookstore in Vermont. He sent James a birthday card once. James threw it away." "And Sabrina? Still in prison? Up for parole next year. I hope they deny it." "Think they learned anything?" "I don't know. I hope so. But it's not my job to rehabilitate them. My job is to help the people they hurt and prevent others from doing the same." Kate nodded. "Richard would be proud." "I know." Claire smiled. "I feel him sometimes, like he's watching, making sure I don't screw this up." "You could never screw this up. You're too much like him. Stubborn, determined, willing to burn it all down for the people you love." The next morning, Claire went to Mercy General Hospital. She did this once a month, volunteering in the maternity ward, talking to expectant mothers, teaching nurses about domestic violence warning signs. In the waiting room, she saw a young woman, maybe 25, 7 or 8 months pregnant, sitting alone. Something about her posture, the way she held herself, reminded Claire of herself 15 years ago. Claire sat down beside her. "First baby?" she asked gently. The woman nodded, not making eye contact. "Nervous?" "Yeah." Claire waited. Sometimes people needed silence before they could speak. Finally, the woman said, "My boyfriend was supposed to be here. He said he had to work." "Does he say that often?" The woman looked at Claire, really looked at her. "How did you know?" "Because I was you once, sitting in this exact hospital, waiting alone, making excuses for someone who didn't deserve them." "What happened?" Claire took a breath. "His mistress pushed me down the stairs. My son was born premature. 3 pounds, 40% chance of survival." The woman's eyes widened. Oh my God, I remember that story. That was you, Claire Morrison, the Safe Haven Foundation? That was me. Your son, did he? He's 19 now, healthy, smart, kind, studying to be a social worker. The woman started crying. I don't know what to do. He's not violent, but he controls everything. My phone, my money, who I see. I thought it would get better when the baby came, but Claire took her hand. It won't get better. It only gets worse. But I can help you. We can help you. She pulled out a Safe Haven Foundation card. Call this number. Tell them Claire sent you. We have lawyers, safe houses, counselors, everything you need to start over. I don't have any money. You don't need money. You just need courage. And you've already shown that by being here, by admitting something's wrong. The woman clutched the card. Thank you. Thank you so much. That evening, Claire got a call from the number she'd given the young woman. Her name was Rachel. She was ready to leave. Kate was coordinating a safe extraction that night while the boyfriend was at work. Claire stayed on the phone with Rachel for an hour, talking her through the fear, the guilt, the worry about doing the right thing. You're saving 2 lives, Claire told her. Yours and your baby's. That's not selfish, that's survival. Were you scared when you left? Terrified, but my father taught me something important. Fear means you're doing something that matters. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth doing. Thank you, Claire, for everything. After the call, Claire sat in her living room. James was studying at the dining table. He looked up. Another one? Another one. You're amazing, Mom. I'm just doing what needs to be done. That's what makes you amazing. Claire thought about the journey that had brought her here. The attack, the betrayal, the fight, the victory, the foundation. Her father's legacy, James's future, all of it connected, pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. She thought about this pregnant wife who had been attacked by her husband's mistress in a hospital 15 years ago. That woman had felt powerless, alone, destroyed. But she hadn't been destroyed. She had been transformed. She thought about the billionaire father who had lost his daughter to pride and found her again through love, who had used his revenge not to destroy but to build, who had taught her that power without purpose was meaningless. She thought about all the women the foundation had helped, thousands of them, each one a life saved, a family protected, a future reclaimed. This was the perfect revenge, not destruction, not punishment, but transformation. Taking the worst thing that ever happened and turning it into the best thing you ever did. Later that night, Claire stood in James's old room, now converted into an office for the foundation. Photos covered the walls, Richard holding baby James, the ribbon cutting at the first safe house, Claire speaking at the governor's signing ceremony, James graduating high school. A new photo caught her eye. Rachel, the woman from the hospital, holding her newborn daughter, safe, free, smiling. Claire had received it that afternoon with a note. Thank you for saving us. We're going to be okay. And someday when my daughter asks about her name, I'll tell her she's called Claire. After the woman who showed me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's strength. Claire touched the photo gently. We did it, Dad, she whispered. We turned the pain into something beautiful. Outside, the city of Boston glittered with possibility. Somewhere out there, a woman was gathering courage to leave. A mother was protecting her child. A survivor was rebuilding her life. And Claire Morrison, former victim, current warrior, would be there to help them. Because that's what family does. That's what justice means. That's what love requires. Showing up, fighting back, never giving up, always.